All right, all right. It is time. Scott, happy Sunday. Happy Sunday. We'll wait. We're going to wait a few minutes and then just roll right in. See where we get in the next like 2 minutes, and then we're just going to go. I have to be off promptly before 7, actually, tonight. So it's going to be a bit of a breeze. But we're just going to do an introduction and then chapter 1, and it's short. Yeah, Nat, it's good to see ya. You just abandoned us. I hope you're okay. I hope nothing happened. Totally joking. I think you know me well enough by now to not take that personally. But it's great to see you. I'm very glad you're here. I'm very bummed that you missed Thursday because it was hot. It was very hot. We had a bit of a debate with somebody outside the group live. It was interesting. So if you get some time, I would highly recommend going and watching it because it was interesting. I had a bit of an emotional outburst that I had to apologize for, which doesn't happen often. It's a very rare thing. So it was an interesting night, isn't it? It was all solved. It all came to a very peaceful ending, but it was interesting. And it was a good example of like us being able to defend what we're doing here and why we're doing it. And it was a good example of why we do things the way we do them. This character that came on. Nothing against him at all. It was just a good representation of kind of what we're fighting against. What we are pushing back against, if you will. All right, guys, we're going to roll right in tonight. So we've got, traveling. Oh, visiting the in-laws. And then sick baby. Yeah, sick babies are a lot. Sick babies are a lot. I totally understand. Next Thursday will be, we're going to begin. We're going to begin. So tonight, we are doing 1 Thessalonians. We're going to do an overview of context, demographic, geography, all the good jazz, so that as we read it, you're like, oh, I get what they're talking about. Because if you don't do that, in my humble opinion, I think you're reading random words that don't make any sense, and I think it's a total waste of your time, in all honesty. So we're going to do an overview of 1 Thessalonians. Then we're going to go into chapter 1, which is relatively short, and then we're going to cut it tonight. Tonight, I need to be off a little bit before 7, if possible, so it's going to be short. Next Thursday for the podcast, we are doing Who is Satan again. We're doing part 2. This could be easily 10 to 20 parts of an hour plus stream because there's just so much depth to it. And there's so many different avenues you could go. So last week we kind of laid a foundation. Like I said, most of it was kind of a debate. It ended up being a bit of a debate, but it was good. It was very good. And I think it was good for the group specifically, anybody who did get to see it, to kind of hear me in the moment and hear Ghost in the moment and Rodriguez in the moment kind of defend and back up why we do things the way we do them, like why this group exists. Why, when there's a million, Christian influencers and there's a million Bible studies you could go join and a million churches you could go join, it was a great example of why we do things the way we do them, and it just reinforced to me personally that this is important, as mundane as it might seem sometimes. It's very important. So part 2 on Thursday is the point. So 1 Thessalonians, we're going to go into some of the context first. So authorship of 1 Thessalonians, it's indicated in the text that it was written by Paul, Apostle Paul, probably along with Silas and or Timothy, which makes sense as you get into it. The date of the writing, the book of 1 Thessalonians was written approximately AD 50, which matters big picture wise. And remember too, now we are going in order. So other than the books we've already done, everything from here forward will be in order, best possible guess in order, because it's not concrete, but in order through the rest of the New Testament. Then we're going to backtrack in order through the Old Testament, chronological order. So the purpose in a thesis statement for this epistle, this letter, the church at Thessalonica, there were many misunderstandings about the return of Jesus. So we're talking the second coming. His intention is to clear up some of those questions, some of those misunderstandings. He also writes it as an instruction in holy living, which is obviously kind of the theme of every epistle he writes, is this is what holy living is. This is why. This is how you live that out. a brief, just very brief summary of the text. The first 3 chapters are Paul longing to visit the church in Thessalonica, but not being able to because Satan, which he mentions here in chapter 1, stopped him, or stopped them because he was traveling with a group, and how Paul cared for them and was encouraged to hear how they had been. So it's him checking in on one of his churches, which is what most of the epistles are. They just each have a kind of a specific reason for that, but that's what they are. It's him checking in on the churches, either scolding them or giving them accolades. Paul then prays for them. In chapter 4, Paul is instructing the believers in Thessalonica on how to live. That's that faith-built life in Jesus and a holy and just a holy life in general. It's the holy direction. Paul goes on to instruct them of a misconception they had, which we're going to talk about. And he tells them that the people who had died in Jesus Christ will also go to heaven when he comes back. So second coming, main theme of this book, second coming. The book ends with the final instruction on just general Christian living, which the best Greek word for this is adiaphora. You guys hear me say it a lot. Adiaphora. Connections. Paul reminds the Thessalonian people that the persecution they receive from their own countrymen, quote unquote, Jewish people, Jews who had rejected their Messiah. So these are the Jews, again, who did not convert. They are against Christianity, pretty vehemently against Christianity, is the same that the Old Testament prophets suffered. So he's comparing what the Thessalonians are going through to what the Old Testament prophets went through. And the interesting piece of context you need to kind of remember is that Paul was a Jew, anti-Christian as you could possibly be, to the point of getting them murdered. And then he comes around, understands, like, okay, there's something to Jesus. I see it now. He is the Messiah, yada, yada. And so now this is a previous Jew who got Christians killed, converting to Christianity and literally starting the entire Christian faith. So now he's going to one of his churches and he's saying, you guys are reminiscent of the Old Testament prophets who suffered. What you guys are suffering from your countrymen here is what the prophets suffered from the people who did not believe them at the time and just thought they were crazy. That's super important to just like keep in mind. Jesus warned that the true prophets of God would always be opposed by the unrighteous. That's out of Luke 11:49. And in Colossians, Paul reminds them of that truth as well. Okay, so rolling right in. One sec. Lilith, good to see you. All right, so 1 Thessalonians. Paul wrote this. This is the introduction from the text. Paul wrote this letter to encourage new believers in their faith, to exhort them to godly living, to give them assurance about the eternal state of believers who had died, and to defend the integrity of his mission, of his ministry, as an apostle. Thessalonica, present-day Thessaloniki, which is Greece, was the capital of Roman Macedonia, which is going to be mentioned a lot throughout this text, and it has been in many of the other texts that we've already covered. It was on important trade routes. That's contextually, that's very important to understand. Why do I care? Why does that matter? These geographical areas, Corinth was one of them as well, that are key shipping or trade routes, means that there is a certain demographic that is there. I want you to think of like a truck stop. Think of a truck stop. I'm not going to say a whole lot more than that. If you've ever been to a truck stop, and I'm not talking about like a super nice Love's or something, I'm talking about like a Thornton's in the middle of nowhere in Detroit truck stop. The folks who hang around these trade routes aren't the most savory folks in the world. So it was no different back then. Many of these geographical areas where there was a lot of ships coming in, a lot of ships coming out, there was a lot of trade happening, there were a lot of open air markets. There was a certain kind of demographic in these areas. So the easiest way to just picture it is anywhere that's on a trade route, you want to just keep in mind like there's a lot of evil going on, whether it's sex trade or whether it's just weird demonic stuff. Paganism is rampant. It's a lot in these areas. It's very consolidated. So the churches that are near or in these areas are dealing with a lot of evil where they're at. A lot of things that are counter to the way of the early Christian movement. Paul twice identified as the author, visited Thessalonica on his second missionary journey, but was forced to flee because of Jewish opposition. He sent Timothy to work with the largely Gentile church there, and Timothy brought him good news of their faith. This is one of Paul's first letters, probably written about AD 50 or 51. So Paul visited Thessalonica during his second missionary journey, roughly 49 to 51 AD. You read about that in Acts. That's Acts 17, 1 through 9. It was where you get that from. Because remember, this is the whole Bible. Figuring out what happened when and how it all worked is a puzzle. So all throughout history, scholarship has tried to put the puzzle together. So Acts gives us probably most of the geographical context we get from inside the Bible of when and where things happened. Some Jews, however, at that time, became jealous and caused a disturbance in the city. That comes out of Acts 17. They accused Paul of claiming there was another king named Jesus, Acts 17 as well, and an act of treason against the Roman emperor, which if you remember in Acts is a heavy freaking book. A lot of stuff happened. You got a lot of context about why Paul is the way he is, why he's so gung-ho about the things that he is. If you have not diligently read Acts and you were not with us when we went through Acts, I really push you to go do that because it's arguably one of the most important books in the New Testament. Before they could arrest Paul, he was sent away. This was his flee. He fled to avoid being arrested. He was not a fugitive, but similar vibe to what he's trying to do, leaving behind a community of new believers. So Paul fled to escape. The believers remained because they were local. And so now this is him trying to contact them again, concerned that they might not withstand that threat, the threat of persecution. So Paul sent Timothy because of that. That's when Timothy went to encourage the Thessalonians. Timothy reported back to Paul that they endured the persecution, but now had concerns about the Lord's return. So they made it through the persecution. They survived it. But now they're very concerned about the end times. They're concerned about what is going to happen with the second coming specifically. Concerned they might not. I'm sorry. Hold on. No, we don't want to read that. All right. So jumping right in. We're good on the overage there. Verse 1, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy. Silvanus, depending on who you talk to. Silas, which is a name you probably recognize more. That was his AKA, was Silvanus. Pastora, lovely to see you. So we're talking about Silas. Was a well-respected leader from the Jerusalem church who accompanied Paul on his second ministerial journey. So Silas, anytime you see this, Silvanus or Silvanus, we're talking about Silas. Paul likely included Silas as a co-sender to the letter, which I mentioned in the overview. It's likely that Paul, to some degree, used both Silas and Timothy to either write or at least get the letter where it was going. Definitely getting the letter where it's going, but it's likely that he used them to actually put the letter together as well, which is a belief about many of Paul's epistles. Now, Timothy is the half Gentile, half Jewish disciple and companion of Paul. Everybody knows Timothy. Timothy was Paul's protege. Paul includes Timothy as a co-sender as well, because like Silas, the Thessalonians knew him. So the people in this area, they knew and were comfortable with both Silas and Timothy. So Paul uses that because he knows that they'll listen to him. They'll listen to either of them. So they're included in this pretty heavily. Now to the church of the Thessalonians, in God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ, grace to you and peace. Thessalonians. The city of Thessalonica, what it's called, was located in the Roman province of Macedonia, which you've heard a million times. If you've read through the Bible, you probably have no idea where it's at. This is Greece. So Macedonia is Greece. And Thessalonica was located within that Roman province. Its harbor, because again, it's a trade station. Its harbor in approximately, how do I want to say this? Think of it as like it's a major highway. Where they were was a major highway. So it was right on the cusp of all this trade and a very, very, very frequently used route for the trade. So you have people coming in and out all the time, which is why, again, sex trade was not uncommon. It was extremely rampant, even back then. People like to pretend that didn't happen or exist at the time. It is as old as time. So big highway, massive trade going on, made it a strategic location for ministry, for Christians who want to reach, the worst of the worst, the most struggling types of people, demographics of people. Well, this is where to be. And then the grace to you and peace. This is it's Paul. If you've read all of or any of Paul's epistles, this is Paul. It's a very typical greeting throughout all of his epistles, Romans, Philippians. It's in most of them. It summarizes his version of the gospel message, which is God's work through Christ, grace, brings people into a beautiful, harmonious relationship with God and one another, which is peace. It's just a very common thing that Paul said in most of the epistles that he wrote. The Thessalonians, faith and example. Verse 2, we give thanks to God always for all of you, constantly mentioning you in our prayers. We give thanks. Paul's letters often follow conventions for ancient letter writing by including a prayer for the recipients. This was super common in and out of Christianity for religious writings at the time. When they were writing letters to each other, many times they would include a prayer in those letters. Not uncommon. Here, Paul thanks God for the Thessalonians' faith, which continued to grow despite his absence and majorly despite the persecution. Because again, Paul fled due to persecution, was worried about them remaining there due to persecution, sent Timothy to go find out how they did, found out they did well, but obviously he's still concerned about that because there's a lot going on there. Mentioning you in our prayers, verse 3, remembering before our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope. Work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope. Faith, love, and hope are the three core Christian virtues. If you've seen in 1 Corinthians and in chapter 5 here, actually, this is in Paul's view, Paul's perspective. So in Paul's teaching, these are the values of Christianity: faith, hope, and love, which is why it became this massively marketed thing on every bumper sticker and canvas on the wall in a suburban household. Faith, hope, and love. Christian values. Most people who espouse these things on a painting on their wall are not Christian. They don't understand that is a Christian value. They serve as evidence of the Thessalonians' salvation and the effectiveness of missionary efforts among them specifically. In our Lord Jesus Christ, for we know, brothers loved by God, that he has chosen you, because our gospel came to you not only in word, but also in power and in the Holy Spirit and with full conviction. You know what kind of men we prove to be among you for your sake. Power. The power being expressed here is a reference to the power evident in Paul's preaching. The power that Paul brought into the area, reaching that number of people and creating a Christian space here. It could also be referring to God's power among the Thessalonians, which confirmed the integrity of his message. So it could also be referring to just God's general power and how, regardless of what was happening in the area, he was still able to reach them. So either way, same message comes across. What kind of men we proved to be among you. Also translated as what sort of people we became among you, which is interesting because there's a bit of a difference there. It's one that isn't message-wise negligible, but choices of words and how to express them. This is an interesting one, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. It's just an interesting one. Paul and his companions worked while they lived among the Thessalonians. So they were working during that time. He reminds them of this to address false accusations about the integrity of his missionary efforts. Shocking that early Christians and churches that he planted were effectively doubting him is really what it is. Basically every church that he planted at some point begins to doubt him and accuse him of this or that. It just depends on the church, but they accuse him of something, which is why many of his epistles, it seems like he's arguing with them or bickering or complaining because they are not trusting him. And he's like, dude, what the hell do I have to do to get you people to trust me? I have done, I have been killed so many, or almost killed so many different times to try to get this message out to people and to try to support you people. I have no idea what else I can do. You can just tell when he gets frustrated. In 2 Corinthians, it was hilarious. Some unnamed people may have claimed that Paul was no different from traveling philosophers who gave speeches to make money. Does this sound familiar for those of you who have been here for the other books? It's identical. It's the same thing. So we talked about it in 2 Corinthians. What was the issue? The false apostles, the false teachers, the people who are going around teaching a message that was very close to Christianity, but twisting it just enough that fundamental things were being taken away. That's the world we live in now, still. It was no different then, and it was no different from church to church. This is a constant, consistent, perpetual problem for Paul. He plants these churches. He puts everything he has into them. He bleeds for them. And then other teachers, false teachers who are philosophers, not theologians would be, I guess, the equivalent. They're philosophers who are going around using the Christian message because it's picking up steam socially to make money, which is why Paul in so many different areas said, no, I will not take your money because I need to somehow prove to you people that I am legitimate, and these people who you're comparing me to and accusing me of being like, do they ask you for $1? Yes, they do. Do I ask you for $1? No. And even when you offer me $1, I tell you no, because I'm trying to prove a point. So poor Paul is going through the same thing at this church that he did at so many others, most of the others. So keep in mind, false teaching, philosophers running around using the Christian message to make money. Key things need to be in the back of your head the whole time. But Paul worked while living with the Thessalonians. Why? Because of what I just said. He doesn't want to take money like a pastor would. So he goes and makes his money in the secular world, doing manual labor. And then he does this as a donation to the church. He refuses to take money. Instead, he chooses to work a secular job, leaving them an example to follow. That is the whole point. Later, he reminds the Thessalonians that he and his co-workers served among them with gentleness and loving care. So he's saying, one, no, I did not take your money, therefore I am different. I've proven that. And two, when we were with you, did we not fully support you with absolute gentleness and love? The answers are yes. Graves, good to see you. A little hard to read some of the chat. The chat should be on YouTube. The one on the screen is kind of like a fail-safe. It's probably better to, if you're actually going to read the chat, it's probably better to see it on YouTube. But the chat is very, very slow. So I don't think you're not really missing anything. All right, so what sort of people? We're on 6 now. And you became imitators of us and of the Lord. For you received the word in much affliction. So imitators, in joyful, enduring persecution. That's what he's talking about. The Thessalonians imitated Paul, his companions, and the Lord. His companions are, again, who? Silas, Timothy. So he's saying, you guys became imitators of us. We came in, me, Timothy, Silas came in. We set the example. We set the stage. We had to flee due to persecution. You all stayed because you are local and you're not being hunted specifically. You all stayed. We were worried about you, but you were able to not only imitate what we brought, which was the whole point, you were also able to endure the affliction, the persecution. The affliction there refers to the opposition and the persecution experienced by the believers in Thessalonica that you're going to hear a whole lot about as we go through the rest of this text. With the joy of the Holy Spirit. So the joy, the Greek word that's used there, refers to a state of rejoicing. So you have to remember, again, English is weird. A lot of other languages, what we say in English for it, there are several different meanings. The most obvious that most people know is like the word for love. The word for love here in America, like we say love. It could mean romantic love. It can mean sexual love. It could mean platonic love. In other languages, that's not the case. In other languages, they have several different words for different kinds of love. Greek is no different. Greek actually has a lot of different words. So in English, we get joy as one of the best translations. The Greek actual meaning of the word that is most accurate is that it's referring to a state of rejoicing or just general happiness, which is close to what we consider joy in English. So it's not an off translation. 7, so that you became an example to all the believers in Macedonia and in Achaia. So Macedonia, we've already brushed on a few times. This was a Roman province on a peninsula, specifically geographically. Thessalonica was located in Macedonia. So it was in this area. So anytime you hear Macedonia, which you hear a lot in church and when you're reading the Bible and stuff, when you think Macedonia, just let it click in your head like, oh, that's where Thessalonica was. It's an easy way to be. Anytime you hear that Macedonia, think I at least know Thessalonica was there. 8, for not only has the word of the Lord sounded forth from you in Macedonia and Achaia, but your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we need not say anything. So he's praising them. He's giving them praise. Achaia is a Roman province south of Macedonia. So you have Macedonia north, which is where Thessalonica is. Achaia, you have south. And this is Macedonia is modern day Greece. The cities of Athens and Corinth were both located in Achaia. So big picture here geographically. Try to grasp it all, because it helps you visualize, like when you're reading the Bible and understanding reference points. I guess if nothing else. So you have the Roman province south of Macedonia is Achaia. So we now know that Thessalonica is in Macedonia. Well, now you can put it in your head that Athens and Corinth, which is where obviously the Corinthian church was, is located in Achaia. So Macedonia north, Achaia south, 1 Corinthians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians up north. But your faith in God has gone forth everywhere, so that we need not say anything. Verse 9, for they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivered us from the wrath to come. So the first thing there in the purple, idols, an object of worship and devotion that resembled a person, a god, or an animal. General definition. The Thessalonians didn't add an idol of Jesus to their pantheon, as would have been their custom before conversion. They abandoned their idols to serve him. So in that, what does it tell you? In this area, similar to Corinth, there was massive paganism. Within paganism, it is not unusual for idols to be a primary thing, which is why a lot of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, mostly 1st Corinthians, is Paul dealing with the people at Corinth who were having pretty significant struggles with idols. They were bringing idolatry into the church. So they were pulling pagan fundamentals into a new Christian movement and trying to incorporate it into Christianity, which wasn't unusual. So it was something that Paul had dealt with all over the place. So he's praising them because they were not doing that, which is great. Then awaits his Son from heaven is in the green there. This is a reference to Christ's visible and personal return to the earth at the end of the present age. Paul says that Jesus will return from heaven because it is the place where he reigns with God. And there is a reference there to Ephesians 1. They made Mandrolas, though. What do you mean? I guess I don't think men are bad, though. Yeah, so I mean, the reference is to spiritual idolatry, though, pretty specifically. And it was, I guess, I'm glad you said that, because to be way more specific, it's believed, we can insinuate, so this is me saying it's best guess in my opinion, is that the congregants who became the Thessalonian church, they were into some specific paganism there. That's kind of the vibe you get as you go through the whole 1st and 2nd text, is that they were all involved in a very specific kind of paganism, or maybe several different specific kinds of paganism, who had a big weight on idolatry. And Paul had already seen other churches, other Christians pulling this idolatry, religious idolatry, into the Christian church. And as of now, he's not seen the Thessalonians do that. So he's just praising them for that. But I mean, That's a good point still. Bring that up. It's a good point. I mean, you could arguably say it's idolatry, but I'd push back a little bit and just say I don't think it was like religious idolatry of them trying to pull their old religion into the new. Because that was like the big problem during this whole period of history, is trying to get Christians to forget everything that you've known. And this is all brand new. You can't bring bits and pieces. They had the same problem with the Jews. I mean, all the Jewish converts kept trying to bring their laws over. I mean, today, we still have Christians trying to pull old Jewish law into Christianity. Like, in what the heck? That's still today. The people who are all wah-wah about tattoos within Christianity, as a very obvious example, are people who are hanging on to, which is hilarious because they're not Jewish, but they're hanging on to Jewish law and trying to still pull it in to like the new Christian movement that is not new at all anymore. It's like still a problem. So there's that, the idolatry. So then waiting of the sun. So just remember with everything that we talk about with them, any references to the second coming of Jesus, Jesus coming back in any way, you have to remember these people thought it was in their lifetime. You can never forget that, because it changes the entire context. It changes the entire feel of it all. If you're reading a book like this, where the people are talking about Jesus coming back, they're not talking about in 2030. They're not talking about in 1947. They're talking about like very soon. So it's within that context, and that's a very important context to have. Now, wrath there, the Greek word that is used there in this context refers to God's judgment upon the wicked specifically, which again is a good translation. The believers of Thessalonica are being encouraged to not mistake affliction and persecution for God's final judgment on the wicked. So this is one of the misunderstandings that the Thessalonian people were having, that Paul, Silas, and Timothy were like, yeah, we need to figure this out and kind of whip them back into shape. Do not mistake affliction and persecution for God's wrath, because that's what they were obviously doing. They were equating the struggles they were going through with God being angry at them and punishing them. So it's Paul saying that is not what is happening. What you're going through is a product of evil. It's a product of the world that we live in. It's a product of life. It is not the product of God's wrath on you. 34. Just give me a sec, guys. I'm trying to see if we can breeze through this, or I'm going to run out of time in the middle of it. Spiritual idolatry would just mean upholding misleading ideologies. In a way, yeah. I mean, it could also be literal just idolatry, though. Like physical idolatry, right? That I know in Corinth, that was one of the weird things, is that the Corinthian people, some of them even like would still come to church, but would also go to pagan rituals. And so they'd bring back like physical items sometimes from other texts, not inside the Bible. But so if you're a Bible only person, then totally ignore me right now. But if you're into external texts, there are other texts that indicate some of the Corinthian congregants would bring items into the church. And if you actually read the text very diligently, I believe it. I believe it. It seems to make sense with a lot of what Paul kind of condemns them for. So I mean, definitely upholding misleading ideologies, but also physical. I mean, idolatry was massively physical, too. Physical items, physical materials. Like they had a big weight on also just physical stuff. All right, we might be able to run through two super quick. Is Danny here? Danny! All the MIA people came in one night. You guys all missed a hot Thursday, but it's good to see you. Danny, it's good to see you. Graves, it's great to see you. And Nat, it's always lovely to see you. I hope we have all of you for Thursday. All right, we're going to try to run through this. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. Mistreated at Philippi. Paul and Silas were beaten and imprisoned there for advocating customs that were unlawful for Roman citizens. And again, if you were not with us for Acts, you need to go watch that. You need to go listen to it, or you need to just go read Acts. But I would highly recommend watching the streams before on Acts, where we go deep into it. If you have not diligently read Acts and fully understand Acts, in my opinion, I don't think you should read any other epistles by Paul. They don't actually make a lot of sense unless you understand Acts and you have the context of Acts. Any of Paul's epistles, I promise you, the most referenced points in them are always going to be from Acts. 100%. There's no doubt at all. So Silas and Paul were imprisoned, beaten for trying to advocate for customs that were unlawful to the Roman citizens. Acts 16 and Acts 16:21 and Acts 16:19 through 39 explain this in great depth. You need the depth. Rah, rah, rah. Go get the depth. 3, for our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God, the approved by God is just a thing that Paul says often. I'm sure you can think of a time. It's just him saying, I was appointed by God as an apostle. That's where the authority is. It is not with me, but God has passed the authority to me to now come and help you guys, to be entrusted with the gospel. So we speak not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts. 5, for we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. A pretext for greed. The Greek word that is used there is in reference to the desire to possess more than others, which is the general definition of greed, regardless of actual need. Again, it's the general reference of greed. Paul and his companions, though, they, like I was ranting about earlier, they tried to make a very obvious stance on that they are not in this for money. From their speech to their actions, they made it as clear as possible. This is not about money. We will go make our money somewhere else outside of the church, and then we will come and gather with you and do this. We'll do God. We'll do ministry. And I do not want your money. Nor did not they use any pretext to disguise the greediness, which is what the philosophers were doing. That was what the traveling philosophers did. They brought either the message of Jesus Christ or a different message, but they'd bring this message. They'd wrap it up beautifully. Most of them were more eloquent with their words than Paul was, which was a Corinthians thing. And they'd deliver these messages, get people hooked, and then what? Ask for money. Then get the money. Because they'd emotionally attract people, and then they would completely drain them of their coins at the time. 6, nor do we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. I love him. So what is he saying? He's saying, we sure as hell could have taken advantage of you. We chose not to. So that should count for something. That should count for something. An apostle is a person designated by God to speak and act with some kind of special authority. That's what an apostle is. Paul did not assert his authority as an apostle. Rather, he appeals to the Thessalonians as a friend in this context. So he's saying, my authority is approved by God, verse 4. He's saying it comes from God. Yet with you right now, I'm not acting necessarily as an apostle. I'm trying to relate to you on a human level. 7, but we were gentle among you. The second reference to gentle, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. 8, so being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. Verse 9, for you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We worked night and day, that we might not be burden to any of you while we proclaimed to you the gospel of God. The labor and hardship, or the labor and toil, depending on your translation. Greeks considered manual labor the duty of slaves, which is, we've talked a lot about in Corinthians and now in Thessalonians. It's going to be, again, a pretty decent theme. The social status spectrum during this time in many of these areas, remembering this is very close to Corinth, and we went into this all very deep in Corinth, and it's no different. Social status was number one. Your social status meant everything. Social status partially came from what you did occupationally, and it came from wealth, which is it's a result of what you did, occupation. It was a huge thing. If you did not have social status, you were seen as absolute garbage. And manual labor, which ironically is what Paul did, and what many of the apostles did, to make their actual wage, was manual labor, or something very close to manual labor. Paul and his companions worked in order to set an example for the Thessalonians and relieve them of having to provide financial support. He didn't want their money. He didn't want to make them give their money, make them less financially stable. He wanted to make a point, and he also wanted to just push back on culture. Because again, for the millionth, bazillionth time, the Christian movement was counterculture. I do not care what you say. It was counterculture. Jesus Christ was counterculture. Paul was counterculture. The entire movement, until we ruined it, was counterculture. Culture was garbage. Culture was evil. Just like today, culture is garbage and it is evil. The Christian movement should be counterculture. And in the beginning it was. At least that was the intention. Now today we adopt culture. We basically get on our knees and love culture. It's disturbing. Paul's goal was to support himself through his long hours of manual labor so that he would not become a burden financially to his churches. 1 Corinthians is another obvious reference to that. 10, you are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct towards you believers. So he's reminding them, he's justifying in a respectful way. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory, like a father. An interesting choice of words. Paul considered himself to be a spiritual father. That's very obvious through his text. To who? To the people that he led to Christ, to his churches, to all of the congregants within these churches. Drawing on the image of father, Paul describes using that image, how he played the role of a father by helping the children mature in faith during their conversion. It's really that simple. It's not like we have baby Christians. People use the term like baby. I hate that, but people use the term like baby Christians and grown Christians. I despise the terminology, but it's biblical, I suppose you could literally say. Kingdom. The Greek word that is used there is a reference in this context to the domain God rules as king. Believers must live in accordance with his commands as subjects within his kingdom. All right, 13. We also thank God constantly. Sorry, guys, I cannot see when I don't have my glasses. Constantly for this, that when you received the word of God, which you heard from us, you accepted it, not as the word of men, but as what it really is, the word of God, which is at work in you believers. I don't know why I'm having this. Give me 2 seconds. No, they're too far away. They're too far away. You're going to struggle with me. I apologize. 14, for you, brothers, became imitators of the church. Remember earlier he said you have succeeded at imitating us. So he's saying you became imitators of the churches of God in Jesus Christ that are in Judea, the Greek and Roman designation for Judah. The territory in Israel, including the cities of Jerusalem, Caesarea, and Capernaum. The area of Judea was the second phase of the evangelical movement of the time after Jerusalem. Again, You would know this if you diligently read Acts. The churches in this region experienced early persecution because it was the birth of the movement. So they had the hardest pushback. For you suffered the same things from your own countrymen, there's that same reference again, as they did with the Jews, who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out and displease God and oppose all mankind by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles that they might be saved. So as always, to fill up the measure of their sins, but wrath has come upon them at last. Interesting side note here. Interesting side note. Jesus Christ is still counterculture. I totally agree. The problem is the entire Christian movement is completely on their knees for culture. Thank you, culture. May I have another, please, sir? That is what Christianity has become. So yes, Jesus Christ will always be counterculture because he was counterculture till he was hung on a cross. So, I mean, you can't change anything about Jesus now. It's done. He's gone. But what he left behind is the opposite of counterculture. They pander to culture. They beg culture to please let us live. Please, God, we're never going to be persecuted ever again. Like, Christians used to take pride. Paul took massive pride in persecution. I would assume that many early Christians took pride in persecution. No Christian is going to experience actual persecution because we are on our knees begging culture for more. Please, please, please. Until that changes, we are nothing like Jesus. Christianity is nothing like Jesus anymore. As a unit, not individuals, as a unit. Let me see. Shoot, I was going to say something. I'll come back to it. So fill up their sins. So as always, to fill up the measure of their sins. It's depicting a period of recurring sin that eventually reaches a breaking point and induces God's judgment. This expectation was common in general Jewish theology. The Genesis, Daniel has references to it. So although Paul seems to focus only on the judgment of Jews, elsewhere he stresses that God's judgment will come upon all unrepentant people, regardless of their ethnicity, that it will hit everybody. Nobody is safe. Wrath, but wrath has come upon them at last. The last sentence there in the paragraph. This is the second time wrath has been used. And I would like you to just think in your brain how often Paul uses the word wrath in other epistles. Not often. Already twice in this epistle, the word is used. Just something to keep in mind. Those persecuting the believers at Thessalonica were the objects of God's anger. So such people sinned against God by opposing Paul's missionary work to the Gentiles. Why wrath? Why so often? There's talk in scholarship, there always has been, that Paul is not the actual author of all of the Pauline epistles. I don't know where I personally land on it, but I would not be surprised at all. Because if you actually go through, and that's not to say they're inauthentic, the belief with that is that either Timothy or Silas wrote them, or maybe a different protege that we are not aware of, but that one of his mentees could have written some of the letters either from his mouth still, or just from what they knew Paul would have said. There's no way to know. But I find word choice in differing epistles very interesting, especially within the context of perhaps Paul didn't personally dictate or write all of the epistles. It's an interesting thing to just kind of keep in mind. 17, but since we were torn away from you, brothers, for a short time, in person, not in heart, we endeavored the more eagerly and with great desire to see you face to face. Now, since we were torn away from you, also could come across in your Bible, depending on made orphans, which is in, I'm trying to think of how much of this I actually want to get into. But one of the other translations that you might see, depending on what you read, is instead of since we were torn away from you, you might see made orphans, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting differentiation in what the translator chose to print. The Greek term that is actually used describes the separation between people, which I suppose would also be orphan, but it's an odd choice for that translation in my opinion. However, it was often used in the context of a parental relationship. So in the time period, it makes sense, and meaning that maybe it's just something that lost sense over time, and it made sense in that time, which would also make sense then why some translators would take it out at this point, because now culture wouldn't really get that. They'd be like, what? Made orphans of? That doesn't make sense. So since we got torn away from you to a 2023 reader, it's obvious, it's clear, it gets the same message across, and it makes sense. It's a good example of like choice of translation that might be dishonest, but it's honest in message, and people are going to have a hell of an easier time understanding what is actually being said. So it's one of these inaccurate translations that, like, I agree with for most of Bible readers. All right, we're about there. 18, because we wanted to come to you, I, Paul, again and again, but Satan hindered us. Interesting also because Paul does not often talk about Satan. If you were to look up all of the time Satan was referenced in the New Testament by Paul specifically, it's not a lot. There are a few, but it's not a lot. Is the enemy of God who opposes Paul and his apostolic ministry. All of his epistles. I mean, probably. It would make sense. Some of the Thessalonians likely were worried that Paul abandoned them. Again, I'm still just trying to remember how much of this I actually want to get into because I have to go. I'll take notes of anything that I choose not to explain more on, and I'll start next week with them. So it was likely Satan who's attacking Paul through all of his ministry. Some of the Thessalonians were very likely worried that Paul had abandoned them when he abruptly left the city and did not come back, which we already covered. He left, they stayed, he fled persecution, they were locals, so they endured it. They endured it successfully. Paul checked in on them, yada yada, happy day, everybody's back together again. But Paul thought that they thought he abandoned them, not that he left for good reason. So Paul assures the people in Thessalonica that his separation, his movement, his orphaning of them was not his choice. It was that Satan was working too heavily in the area, and Paul was being specifically targeted. So do you stay and possibly die, and then all of your ministry dies with you? Or do you flee because you are actually one of the primary targets to live and fight another day? Is the choice that I suppose you would have. For what is our hope or joy or crown of boasting before our Lord Jesus at his coming? Is it not you? For you are our glory and joy. Hey there. Hey there.
5 minutes before the stream is over.
It's already over. I read the last word. Thank you, though. Thank you, though. Spiritual idolatry is more like misplaced worship. Spiritual idolatry is more like misplaced worship. From a Christian perspective, sure. That's the thing I find so funny about a lot of this stuff. Is like, your idolatry is another person's religion. And your religion is their idolatry. So, I mean, I don't call anybody's religion idolatry. I don't call anybody worshiping whatever they want to worship idolatry. I mean, per a biblical definition, it would be if you subscribe to Christianity. If you don't, then it doesn't. It's all interchangeable. That's why I avoid things like that. I mean, I don't care what anybody believes. And I'm just going to do what I think is right, and it's kind of that simple. But I don't like calling other people's religions idolatry personally, because to me, it's kind of self-righteous. You good there? You survived? It's good news. You broke something?
Unless
Don't do that. Today is not the day. Yes, physical idols are like totems, a visual symbol of a spiritual or non-physical concept, similar to how we equate a red octagon with the concept of stopping. Yeah, but we don't really place like any value in a stop sign. So a stop sign is as simple as kind of worthless. It's more of like a reference point. Many of the physical idols, they also thought had physical powers, though, that come from the spiritual connection. So, I mean, that makes it kind of distinctly different. We shouldn't pray to stop signs when we want a sickness to stop, etc. Yeah, I think it's different, though, man. Jesus Christ is still counterculture. What would have been incentive in flipping Christianity on its head? I think really any religion would have had incentive to flip Christianity on its head. I mean, any of the earlier... any of them at all. The local governments had incentive, and every local religion had incentive. Meaning is more important than words, for sure. Jesus is punk rock in a way. Yeah, absolutely. That's well put. Paganism, worshiping visual concepts. Christianity, worshiping the creator of those concepts. Yeah, but pagans believed in more than just visual concepts. It wasn't that simple. That's a very simple explanation. I agree, but I think it's incomplete, I would say. Pagans also believe in deities. So they're applying meaning to items through deities. I mean, to me, it's no different. If I'm being honest, it's no different than Catholicism. Catholics apply spiritual value to individuals who are dead, who are not deity, and they apply spiritual value to physical items based on the deity above. So think of like a rosary, or think of a crucifix. I mean, I grew up in Catholic school. They say they don't practice idolatry because, of course, they can't say they do. But they absolutely practice idolatry. They just own it. Like, we do it because it's God. So it's idolatry that is permitted by God. I wish they would just say that, because there's no way around the fact that Catholics practice idolatry. So just own it. If you want to do that, that's fine. I don't think it hurts anybody. Worship doesn't have to be religious. Some people worshiping something can be called addicts in some cases. Yeah, worship doesn't have to be religious at all, or spiritual at all. Rodriguez says hi, because she sees your butt, probably.
Hi, friend.
I was going to say exactly the same, Joe. We see a lot in the Catholic Church. Yeah, I mean, I don't get why you hide it as a Catholic. Like, I've had debates with Catholics about idolatry, and it was embarrassing. I truly felt embarrassed for them because they wouldn't just own it. I believed what happened, and what he is referring to is that he could not come unto them because he had to go to another place or church. Remember, he said that he robbed other churches to do them service. What, Paul? Paul specifically fled due to persecution. It's in chapter 1, all over it. If I assume you came in late, because I'm just seeing you pop up. Go read chapter 1 first. He left because of persecution. It's clear as day. I mean, in my eyes, there's no conversation there, unless you're referring to something else, and then I might have you wrong. Burning a tiny statue of St. Anthony in your front yard to help you find something you lost definitely isn't idolatry. Yeah, like that's a great example. That's a great example. Having the little saint cards that like you kiss and you pray over, or you pray to, praying to a saint that's not a deity, it's not God, it's not Jesus, it's not the Holy Spirit, therefore it's not your religion's God, is by definition idolatry. So just own it. Own it. And just say, yes, we idolize these physical things because of their connection to God, the same God that all of Christianity worships. So who cares? I don't get it, because who cares? It does no damage. It's the same God. I take issue when the saints get worshipped. I take issue even when like Mother Mary gets worshipped, because I don't see any way to justify it. I don't see any way where it logically makes any sense whatsoever. And I don't see it. It reinforces what Catholics have, the damage that Catholics have done by separating God from people, which was a huge part of the beginning of Catholicism, was creating a massive divide between the individual and the God. Now you have to go through a priest. You have to pray to a saint. You have to pray to Mary and ask Mary to pray to Jesus. Like, what the hell are you doing? They were doing anything to get the individual as far away from God as possible and make them go through all these different avenues and mazes and put a puzzle together and all of that to be able to actually get to God. And it was still never personal. You need to go intercession. You need to go through this person. That person will contact this person. He'll call her, and then she'll call God. And then God will hear your prayer. Being Italian specifically, you'd be shocked how much superstition is in their vision of religion. Always made me. Yeah, my dad is Italian. He's very tall. He's very dark. His mom's from Italy. And I grew up Catholic, so I totally get what you're saying. They're just misled or don't think it means they'll burn in hell. I mean, yeah, true enough. I got a buddy that's Eastern Orthodox that has kind of justified to me it's pretty much tribalism that keeps Jesus on the mind while living in this world. Huh. I guess what do you mean by that? I don't fully understand your Orthodox buddy's statement. If you want to explain a little bit, shoot, I gotta go, guys. Two more minutes. I gotta roll tonight. I gotta get off. I don't think so. Oh, okay, Ghost. That makes more sense. I don't think it means they'll burn in hell. I completely agree with that. Yeah, I think they're misled. I think they're confused. And honestly, I think, like I said, I think it's damage that the Roman Catholic Church did to all of Catholicism that is still here, that they haven't grown out of. I mean, the things the Roman Catholic Church did to keep people from God, to me, is very similar to what the governments all throughout history have done to keep people away from God. It's been a massive, massive conspiracy for all of time. Is the people in power were keeping the lower level people away from God. They were trying to stifle spirituality, which is also why I believe so much spirituality has been pulled out of the Bible over the years. All of these references to demons and angels and the Nephilim and spiritual concepts that either were watered down, completely redacted and removed, or altered into something much softer, much less spiritual, much more stone. Like putting physical items and people as saints above others. Oh, okay. I got you. Yeah, I don't agree with that. It's what keeps Jesus on their mind while living in this world. I think if you need physical items and saints to worship instead of God, what's the difference? What's the difference? Especially saints, they're dead. So if you can't remember God, who is, for simple conversation's sake, who is dead, why would you remember a saint who is dead? The physical item I get, but you don't need to worship the physical item. That's the difference. You can have a bracelet that says Jesus on it, and then that would remind you to pray or to think of God or whatever. You don't worship the bracelet. It's a reminder. It's a piece of rubber around your wrist that helps you remind things. No Shave November is over. It's No Shave Winter. Rodriguez. It's No Shave all winter and possibly into the summer, because now I've become a little bit attached to it, being honest, which I don't normally get. I like being clean shaven, but for some reason I'm digging the beard lately. So we'll see.
You look wonderful.
Do I? Okay, I'll take a word for it.
Your haircut.
My haircut does look good. Cat cuts my hair.
Yeah.
For those who don't know. For those of you who do not know. All right, guys, I gotta roll. We have, Thursday. We are doing, boom. I guess if you're watching this later, you're watching a recording, you're not a part of the Discord group, there will be a link in the description of the video. Join the Discord group. It's free. It'll always be free. Thursday, we're doing the part 2 to the Satan video from last week. Joshua, I saw, you were here a minute ago. If you're still here and you're interested in coming on for that again, we would love to have you. It'll always be respectful. It'll always be peaceful. It's just a conversation. Anybody else who has questions, comments, anything about Satan this can be from like the occult side, from the Jewish side, from the Hindu side, from the Christian side. It doesn't matter. It's just the concept of Satan, the concept of the devil will also include too. Anything specific you would like to bring or add, come to the stream chat in Discord, click it, and then come to Who is Satan? Rodriguez started this up for us last week on Thursday. Just go in here and just drop things in there. You can see Ghost threw some stuff in here. I'll probably throw some stuff in here too. But we'll use this as reference. So I can pull this up during the stream and we can kind of go through it, explain, and go from there.
We can cover snakes.
We can also cover snake. Do you have one in your hand?
I do.
Okay, come.
What?
Come. Come, woman. You beautiful, lovely woman. There is Satan.
No.
Yeah, huh?
It's a little homicide hose.
But the Bible said so.
The Bible lies.
Bible said so.
The Bible is
Bible said so.
This is our Rahab snake.
There's a snake right there. That's a snake that might bite you. We don't know this snake very well.
Well, he can see now. I have
So
such
probably
great
not.
news to tell you. I can't.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm done, so you can tell me.
Santa?
Beard. Beards always. Do a poll. Do a poll on what? On the beard?
No.
No.
Absolutely not.
For me to shave based on internet stuff, it's gonna take more than that. We'll see. Maybe we'll do it as like a fundraiser, and then I'll shave. We'll see.
What is that?
For a new beard clipper.
No, it's called Christmas. That's the fundraiser.
Oh my god. Super excited to go back and listen to last Thursday's conversation that I missed. Yeah, Nat, you need to do it. You need to watch it. And while you do, take notes so that you can bring them to this Thursday. It'll be real good. It was real good last week, but it'll be real good this time. Hopefully it doesn't at all become it wasn't bad last week, but we weren't able to cover as much as we wanted to because we got kind of hung up and ended up talking about a bunch of unrelated things, and which is fine. It was totally good conversation. It was good. But my point, hopefully this Thursday we can stay more on topic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's what I'm trying to say. Lilith says cool snakes. Cool snake.
Lilith, I
Cool
love
snake.
you.
All right, I think that's it, guys. I think that's it. It is the 3rd also, so I'm going to do the financial report for October. I'll put that in Discord only. That doesn't go anywhere else. I hope and trust that you guys also don't share it. But that'll just be in probably the announcement section. I did it last month. I'm going to do this every month now, just to show how much money comes in through doing this to me, like through YouTube, through Discord, through all of social media. I'll show you guys what I get for doing this and kind of break that down, just so there's no accusations and so there's full transparency. I feel, I don't know why I haven't been doing it this whole time, but I feel like it's the right thing to do because I complained about churches making way too much money and using the money in an improper way. So expect that probably in the next couple days, but that'll be the financial report from everything that has to do with this stuff that we do over the month of November. It's November. It's December, so it'll be for November. I think that's it, guys. I love you all. I'll see you Thursday for the Satan thing. I'll post the financial thing in the next couple days for transparency's sake. And I hope you all have a great first couple days of the week.